With today's economy, many of us look back and wonder, were cars ever truly affordable? Well, back in the 80s, there were models so cheap that if they were sold today with the same logic, they'd cost less than a high-end smartphone. If you think paying $20,000 for an entry-level car is outrageous, just wait until you see how little the cheapest cars of the era cost. Of course, there was a price to pay for that affordability. And I'm not just talking about money. Some of these cars were practically disposable. Others struggled to hit 60 miles per hour without feeling like they'd fall apart. And a few simply should have never made it past the drawing board. Today, we're taking a trip down memory lane with 10 ridiculously cheap American cars from the 1980s. True budget relics that defined a generation and, for better or worse, are still remembered to this day. Oh, and if this video hits 5,000 likes, I'll bring you the 70s edition where the cheap cars were even more questionable. So buckle up if your 80s car even came with seatbelts from the factory, and let's get into the list. 10th Ford Escort 1981 to 1990. The Street Warrior original price in 1981. $5,518, around $18,000 today. Kicking off our list is the Ford Escort, one of Ford's first small cars designed to compete with Japanese imports. When it debuted in 1981, it promised affordability and efficiency. But let's be honest, this was the kind of car you bought because you didn't have a better option. The base model was as bare bones as it gets. No power steering, no power windows, and no air conditioning. If you wanted comfort, you had to roll down the windows manually and pray it wasn't too hot outside. Under the hood, it had a 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine focused more on fuel economy than performance, taking around 12 seconds to hit 60 miles per hour, which was considered acceptable for a budget car in the 80s. But the real highlight, gas mileage. It could get up to 40 miles per gallon on the highway, an impressive number for its time. The 1980s Ford Escort was simple and reliable, but also completely forgettable. If you spotted one on the road today, your first thought would probably be, wait, those things are still around? 9. Chevrolet Chevette, 1976 to 1987. Simplicity taken to the extreme original price in 1980. 4,816, around $17,000 today. If the name Chevette sounds familiar, that's because it was sold for years in Brazil. In the US, it had a similar fate, a small, cheap car that seemed designed with one goal, to be disposable. The American Chevette came with either a 1.4-liter or 1.6-liter engine, depending on the model year, paired with a 4-speed manual transmission. And it wasn't just slow, it was painfully slow. We're talking 0 to 60 miles per hour in over 15 seconds. If you were on the highway, you'd better think twice before trying to pass anyone, because it could take a while. On the bright side, the Chevette was extremely fuel efficient, hitting up to 42 miles per gallon on the highway. For many drivers, that was enough to overlook the fact that it vibrated more than an unbalanced washing machine and had an interior that made a Volkswagen Beetle feel like a luxury car. Despite its flaws, the Chevette sold millions of units and did exactly what it was meant to do, be an affordable ride for those who couldn't spend much. 8. Plymouth Horizon Dodge Omni, 1978 to 1990. The almost European. Hatch original price in 1982. $5,290, around $18,500 today. Here we have two cars for the price of one. The Plymouth Horizon and Dodge Omni were nearly identical, and they had a little secret. Even though they were American, they were clearly inspired by European hatchbacks. With a 1.7-liter engine producing a modest 65 horsepower, this wasn't exactly a thrilling ride, but it was practical and fuel efficient, which was all that mattered for budget-conscious buyers at the time. Owners of the Omni Horizon got to enjoy heavy steering, uncomfortable seats, and a dashboard that looked like an old-school clock radio. Yet surprisingly, people loved this car. It had decent interior space and made for a great first car for those who didn't want to break the bank. Despite being one of the best-selling cheap cars of the 80s, most Omnis and Horizons disappeared from the streets by the 2000s. Finding one in good condition today is about as rare as spotting a unicorn. 7. AMC Spirit, 1979 to 1983. AMC's last gasp. Original price in 1980, $5,990, around $20,000 today. American Motors Corporation, AMC, launched the AMC Spirit. The company was already on its last legs. This hatchback was meant to compete with the affordable economy cars of the era, but in reality, it was just a modernized version of the AMC Gremlin, without the weird charm of its predecessor. The Spirit came with a 2.5-liter engine, which was big for a small car. That meant it burned more gas than most cars on this list, but at least it wasn't as painfully slow as the Chevette. The base model was so stripped down that it didn't even come with a factory radio. That's right, you had to pay extra just to get an AM radio, something that would be unthinkable today. The AMC Spirit was one of the last models produced before Chrysler took over AMC. These days, it has a cult following among die-hard AMC fans, but back in the day, it was just another budget-friendly option for people who didn't want an Escort or a Chevette. 6. Ford Fairmont, 1978 to 1983. The cheap sedan. No one remembers original price in 1980, $5,460, around $19,500 today. The Ford Fairmont was the kind of car you saw in every parking lot in the 80s, yet no one really cared about it. It was a mid-size sedan with a budget-friendly price, designed to be a no-frills family car. The base model came with a 2.3-liter four-cylinder engine, which barely had enough power to get it moving. There were V6 and even V8 options, but the budget version was incredibly slow. The interior? Hard plastic everywhere, a dashboard that looked like a microwave radio, and seats with less comfort than a park bench. But for many American families, the Fairmont was the first brand new car they could afford, and that's why it sold well. Ford retired the Fairmont in 1983, replacing it with the Ford Tempo, another cheap car that, spoiler alert, will also make an appearance on this list. 5. Chevrolet Citation, 1980-1985. The car that overpromised and underdelivered original price in 1980, $5,700, around $20,000 today. Chevrolet introduced the Citation as an innovative front-wheel drive hatchback, a big deal for the brand at the time. The problem? It was plagued with mechanical issues and recalls, quickly earning a terrible reputation. The base model came with a 2.5-liter Iron Duke engine, known more for its durability than performance. Acceleration was painfully slow, and the 4-speed manual transmission didn't do it any favors. Despite its flaws, the Citation sold millions of units in its early years. But as its many defects became apparent, sales plummeted. Today, finding a running Citation is a mechanical miracle, since most of them ended up rusting away in backyards across America. The fourth Ford Tempo, 1984-1994, the car that tried to be modern but failed original price in 1984, $6,000, around $19,500 today. The Ford Tempo was marketed as a modern and aerodynamic car for its time, but in reality, it was just another dull, budget-friendly sedan. Powered by a 2.3-liter four-cylinder engine, the Tempo had mediocre performance, and the automatic version was infamously slow. The base model was as basic as it gets. No air conditioning, no power windows, no power steering. While its design may have seemed futuristic in 1984, it aged quickly and looked outdated within just a few years. The Ford Tempo was popular among taxi drivers and budget-conscious buyers, but let's be honest, no one really misses it today. 3. Pontiac T1000, 1981 to 1987. The disguised Chevette original price in 1982, $5,495, around $18,500 today. If you thought the Chevette was already a cheap car, imagine one sold under the Pontiac brand. That's right, the Pontiac T1000 was basically just a Chevette with a different badge and a few minor aesthetic tweaks. It came with a 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine and a 4-speed manual transmission. Like the Chevette, it was incredibly basic. No power steering, no power windows, and zero extra comforts. The Pontiac T1000 never really took off and was discontinued in 1987. Today, it's a rare sight, not because it became a collector's item, but simply because most of them ended up in the junkyard. 2. Dodge Aries Plymouth Reliant, 1981-1989. The famous K cars, original price in 1981, $5,880, around $19,800 today. 80s, Chrysler was on the verge of bankruptcy, and its last hope rested on the K cars, like the Dodge Aries and Plymouth Reliant. These cars were simple, cheap, and fuel-efficient, but definitely not exciting. The base model came with a 2.2-liter four-cylinder engine, which got the job done without much enthusiasm. Despite their lackluster performance, the K cars were a massive success, playing a crucial role in saving Chrysler from financial collapse. They were known for being durable but painfully boring. In fact, many owners ditched them as soon as they could afford something better. 1. Yugo GV, 1985 to 1992, the cheapest and most hated car of the 80s. Original price in 1987, $3,990, around $13,500 today. If you thought the other cars on this list were bad, wait until you hear about the Yugo GV. Technically a Yugoslavian-built vehicle, it was marketed in the U.S. as an affordable American car. But that was wishful thinking at best. With a 1.1-liter engine producing just 55 horsepower, the Yugo GV was painfully slow and horribly built. It broke down constantly, had terrible build quality, and handled so poorly that it made a Chevette feel like a luxury car. Despite all this, the Yugo GV actually sold well, until people realized just how awful it was. By the 1990s, its reputation was in ruins, and the brand vanished from the U.S. market. Today, the Yugo GV is remembered as one of the worst cars in history, which ironically has made it a cult classic among collectors. So, which of these cars do you remember or have seen on the road? Drop a comment and let me know which one you'd actually dare to drive. Remember, if this video hits 5,000 likes, I'll bring you a list of cheap cars from the 70s. And trust me, some of them were even worse. See you in the next one. Car Exhaust.